Hello, thank you for joining us. My name is Donovan from Salt of the Streets, and this is a review preview for the months of June and July. Our June book is Cant Hurt Me by David Goggins, and our July book is 1776 by David McCullough. These books are both fantastic. I've read 1776 before, but this is the first time that I've read Cant Hurt Me. So we're going to start here, and then we'll get to the preview portion. So review, Cant Hurt Me, the pace was, like 11.8 pages, I think, something like that. It was pretty easy. This book was pretty widely spaced, so it was relatively easy to get through. And I liked it a lot. I feared a little bit, there was a little bit of a lag in there, that is for sure, because probably about a third of the way through it, I just felt like it was a story of just David Goggins' intensity, and it was just a lot, to hear of someone's continued success, even if they're not perfect successes, to hear of that all the time is just difficult. Eventually, and we'll get into that in this review, he starts to get into what I call the Goggins mentality, where it starts to kind of negatively impact his life in a few different ways. So let's just go ahead and start at the beginning, right? Well, the first thing that I thought, or the first note that I have here, is that David Goggins' childhood was horrific. The abuse that he endured, both physically and psychologically at the hands of his father, was very disturbing. It will never make sense to me how people are able to treat their children that way. I have a difficult time with even like spanking Dax the very few times that I have, or like giving him a flick on the mouth. I don't have a hard time reckoning with doing that because he is a human being. He's another person. We are equal outside of the size factor, so it's difficult. I can't reckon with it, so it disturbs me that people can do it. It is interesting to note, I think, that people who reach high levels of success almost always go through really adverse circumstances when they're young, right? Even if there's not when they're children like David Goggins, because he was a child when he was going through this. He's 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, right? Throughout teenage years, something like that, they all deal with adversity. And obviously there's any number of lessons you can draw from that, from overcoming circumstances, learning your true capabilities and things like that. But it is extremely common to hear stories like this of savage abuse among people who become very extremely successful. And I find that very odd, that it almost seems like, and this is totally off the cuff now, I don't have this written anywhere, but it almost seems like it can kind of send you in two very different directions. You can have a very difficult time in life because it continues to impact you and negatively impact the way that you interact with people, the way that you learn things, the way that you work and build relationships, or it can harden you and harden your mind and force you to want to be better. And not that everyone doesn't want to be better, but like David Goggins, like I can't think of a list of other people right now, but I find it very interesting that that's such a common theme of people who become so ridiculously great. So we'll move on to the next point. So what I call the the Goggins mentality, right, is truly born in his teenage years, his late teenage years, and the various aspects of it that we learned throughout the book, the accountability mirror, or when he talks about taking souls, the cookie jar. These are different aspects of the Goggins mentality. And the first example is the accountability mirror, right? And they're all tools that he uses to harden him through the continued adversity that he suffers through his life. So we'll go ahead and we'll find our first reading here. I remember my very first day in the gym back in Indiana. My palms were soft and quickly got torn up on the bars because they weren't accustomed to gripping steel. But over time, after thousands of reps, my palms built up a thick Callus Protection. The same principle works when it comes to mindset. Until you experience hardships like abuse and bullying, failures and disappointments, your mind will remain soft and exposed. Life experience, especially negative experiences, help callous the mind, but it's up to you where that callus lines up. If you choose to see yourself as a victim of circumstances into adulthood, that callus will become resentment that protects you from the unfamiliar. It will make you too cautious and untrusting, and possibly too angry at the world. It will make you fearful of change and hard to reach, but not hard of mind. That's where I was as a teenager. But after my second hell week, I'd become someone new. I'd fought through so many horrible situations by then and remained open and ready for more. My ability to stay open represented a willingness to fight for my own life, which allowed me to withstand hailstorms of pain and use it to callous over my victim's mentality. That shit was gone, buried under layers of sweat and hard fucking flesh, and I was starting to callous over my fears too. That realization gave me the mental edge I needed to outlast Psycho Pete one more time. And this is when David Goggins starts talking about taking souls, right? His practice of taking souls is Born in Hell Week when Psycho Pete is actively trying to fuck with him harder than anybody else. He's punishing him. He's singling him out to make him do extra difficult work during Hell Week at Butts. He turns that on Psycho Pete and continues to fuck with him. He switches that mentality and tells him, I take it. I want more. I'm going after you. He starts singing, right? He's singing songs from old Vietnam War movies to fuck with Psycho Pete. He's taking souls. That's weird. That's a weird thing. And I don't feel uncomfortable saying that. It's very, very odd that anyone, let alone all of the people who can, David Goggins and everybody who has learned these tricks from him, can tap into something deeper within themselves to take someone else's soul, to completely flip the mental game in their favor. It's truly incredible. So the Goggins mentality works to extreme success, right? But as we kind of talked about earlier, none of these successes are flawless. And that's because, as David Goggins finds out, just being the hardest motherfucker in the world is not the only thing that it takes to be great. For a long time, he can ride that out, right? But he finds out, like I said, through Buds, through the San Diego 100, the Hurt 100, these big races that he does where he absolutely struggles to make it through at the end. And he has enormous blood blisters. In the first San Diego 100, when he's taken from the race course, he's like peeing brown liquid and blood, and he collapses inside of his house. He goes into renal failure. It's horrible, horrible things that goes on because he wasn't prepared, but he was so hard in his mentality. His mind was so calloused. He was able to push himself through his lack of preparation to his own demise, right? As we saw, he's collapsing in the shower inside of his own apartment. So it takes more than that to be truly great. And as he goes on through his life and he starts to fail at things, the second time he tries to run Badwater, he's able to not complete some of these things. It's partially because of the health issues that he's dealing with, and it's also partially because of his lack of preparation in the way that he needs to. He believes that just being hard is able to push him through to the end of success, and eventually he learns that it's not. So this is an example of not only another one of the tools of the Goggins mentality, but one of those flawed wins that we were talking about. The cookie jar became my energy bank. Whenever the pain got to be too much, I dug into it and took a bite. The pain was never gone, but I only felt it in waves because my brain was otherwise occupied, which allowed me to drown out the simple questions and shrink time. Each lap became a victory lap, celebrating a different cookie, another small fire. Mile 81 became 82, and an hour and a half later, I was in the 90s. I'd run 90 fucking miles with no training. Who does that shit? An hour later, I was at 95, and after nearly 19 hours of running almost nonstop, I'd done it. I did 100 miles. Or had I? I couldn't remember, so I ran one more lap just to make sure. After running 101 miles, my race finally over, I staggered to my lawn chair and Kate placed a camouflage poncho liner over my body as I shivered in the fog. Steam poured off me. My vision was blurred. I remember feeling something warm on my leg, looked down and saw I was pissing blood again. I knew what was coming next, but the porta potties were about 45 feet away, which may have well been 40 miles, or 4,000. I tried to get up but was way too dizzy and collapsed back into that chair, an immovable object ready to accept the inevitable truth that I was about to shit myself. It was much worse this time. My entire backside and lower back were smeared with warm feces. Kate knew what an emergency looked like. She sprinted to our Toyota Camry and backed the car up onto the grassy knoll beside me. My legs were stiff as fossils frozen in stone, and I leaned on her to slide into the back seat. She was frantic behind the wheel and wanted to take me directly to the ER, but I wanted to go home. We lived on the second deck of an apartment complex in Chula Vista, and I leaned on her back with my arms around her neck as she led me up that staircase. She balanced me up against the stucco as she opened the door to our apartment. I took a few steps inside before blacking out. I came to on the kitchen floor a few minutes later. My back was still smeared with shit, my thighs caked in blood and urine. My feet were blistered up and bleeding in 12 places. 7 of my 10 toenails were dangling loose, connected only by tabs of dead skin. We had the combination tub and shower, and she got the shower going before helping me crawl toward the bathroom and climb into the tub. I remember lying there, naked, with the shower pouring down on me. I shivered, felt, and looked like death, and when I started peeing again. But instead of blood or urine, what came out of me looked like thick, brown bile. This is the type of stuff that happens to you when you push your body to its extents without preparing yourself. And I'm not denigrating him. He fucking ran 101 miles, right? I can't, I'm not going to say I can't. I will not run 101 miles. I'm not going to do it. I will not do it. I don't have the drive to do it because this is exactly what will happen to me if I do that. But this, I gotta believe that this is when he starts to realize I may be not doing this the exactly correct way. I did it. I succeeded in my goal. I ran the 100 miles that I needed to so I could get into this Badwater race, but maybe I should do this a little bit differently. Okay, so after David Goggins does run that first Badwater, he starts to talk about the different ways that his mentality isolated him from other people and it hardened his personality, right? Which is not a good thing. This is when he starts to really have issues. When he starts to see himself on a different level from other people, not because he thinks he's better than them necessarily, but because he knows that the effort that he is willing to put in is so much greater than the effort that they're willing to put in on a daily basis. Their goals to be great are different. For a lot of the Navy SEALs that he's working with, that's enough for them. The fact that they've reached the Navy SEAL status, which is an exceptionally high status, the fact that they've reached that goal is enough for him. For David Goggins, it's never enough. He says multiple times in this book, there is no finish line. And I was talking to Shane about this book, and I asked him, and I said, I've got to wonder, where is the end? At what point do you become, fine with the success that you have achieved? The answer is there. He is never fine. It is never enough. There is no finish line. And when you are in, he even has the chapter called The Uncommon of the Uncommon. When you're in that group, you have to work just as hard, not only at being great, but to not isolate yourself from everybody else, because you are in such a small elite class of people that is willing, even just in mentality, willing to work that hard. And I feel that the hardening of the personality is what turns most people away from the Goggins mentality. And this is where David Goggins chose to not only embrace it, but refine it, right? There are a lot of people, I think, that when they hear David Goggins talk, or maybe even read this book or hear about the book, like, it's just too much. The whole deal, it's just way too much. And it was. That's part of the whole point of the book, is that it was too much at one point, and it fucked with his life, and he had to adjust his entire mentality to maintain being great and also not be a fucking dickhead that no one wanted to be around, right? He's very uncommon. Everyone says that. Lex Friedman, Joe Rogan, everyone who knows him always talks about how uncommon he is, but they also enjoy being around him. So he's not an asshole. He's not a bad person. He's a good guy, but he had to work on that. He had to find that and refine it. And if you don't stick through the book long enough to find that out, then you will never know that. It doesn't seem, I've not watched hours of David Goggins talking, but it doesn't seem like that's something you really pick up on when he speaks publicly. You really pick up on the hardness of the mentality. So if you're not even reading this book to try and understand the story, then I don't think you'll really get the full breadth of the David Goggins mentality. And I think that that's really important. And I feel that these pitfalls, the personality hardening and things like that of the Goggins mentality, the pitfalls of the Goggins mentality are never truly questioned or considered, as if David Goggins never considered them, like he never dealt with it, as if he was able to become a complete human being. He's got to be almost 50 years old, as if he was able to get through his whole life on just that. It doesn't work that way. No one can have successful relationships, pure personally or deeply personally, if that is all. If it's just being hard all the time, no one can form a relationship with that way. You can't be a successful person within yourself if that's who you are. So if that's what you think, then you're thinking of the Goggins mentality on a very shallow level, which seems very foolish for something that a man has spent 30, 40 years of his life refining into an entire lifestyle. So this is an example of what I was talking about, of the Goggins mentality hardening his personality, and it starts to affect his relationships with other people. During week 2 of my 2nd platoon, my chief and OIC, officer in charge, showed their cards. It was devastating to hear that they didn't feel that we needed to earn our status every day. Sure, all the guys I worked with over the years were relatively hard guys and highly skilled. They enjoyed the challenges of the job, the brotherhood, and being treated like superstars. They all loved being SEALs, but some weren't interested in starting at zero because just by qualifying to breathe air, they were already satisfied. Now that is a very common way of thinking. Most people in the world, if they ever push themselves at all, are willing to push themselves only so far. Once they reach a cushy plateau, they chill the fuck out and enjoy their rewards. But there's another phrase for that mentality. It's called getting soft, and that I could not abide. As far as I was concerned, I had my own reputation to uphold, and when the rest of the platoon opted out of my custom-made hellscape, the chip on my shoulder grew even bigger. I ramped up my workouts and vowed to put out so hard it would hurt their fucking feelings. As head of PT, that was not in my job description. I was supposed to inspire guys to give more. Instead, I saw what I considered a glaring weakness and let them know I wasn't impressed. In one short week, My leadership regressed light years from where I was in Ranger School. I lost touch with my situational awareness and didn't respect the men in my platoon enough. As a leader, I was trying to bull my way through, and they bucked against that. Nobody gave an inch, including the officers. I suppose all of us took a path of least resistance. I just didn't notice it because physically I was going harder than ever. So that's exactly what I was talking about. It's just like he said, he was going harder than ever. He's reaching difficult times, and he's just thinking, it's worked in the past that I just keep fucking pushing, so I'm just going to go, right? And that's one of the things earlier in the book that I identified with. When he was having a difficult time in his relationships, when the girl that he was with got pregnant, right? He's sitting on the couch in front of his mom. He's crying. He's had his eyes covered up, and he's just like, I just don't know what to do. I just don't know what to do. He goes, I don't know, but I just have to keep going. And I identified so deeply with that. I'm like almost getting chills right now. All of the times in my adult life that I have reached an extremely difficult point and I didn't know what to do, the only thing that I could find was to just continue, right? I knew that I couldn't give up. I knew that I couldn't stop, for myself, for my family, for everything. For Jordan when I got with her, for Dax when he was born, I couldn't stop. And it's so difficult to muster that, but I would give the credit to all of my success to my ability to do that, to just push forward, to know that to give up is not an option, and that all I have to do is just keep going, keep trying, just keep pushing, and I will figure out in the end what the best thing is to do. That, if anything at all to take from this book, is that you don't have to always be the hardest. You don't have to do anything other than always try. Continue to push, never give up, even if you can't find a reason. Right? Even if the only reason is just my family. It's I just have to go. Giving up is not an option. That's the base reason right there. Giving up is never an option. So as David Goggins goes on and he starts to have these difficulties, not only interpersonally, but he starts to fail some of these big challenges that he's going for in his life, he finds out the only solution for him is to relax. Right? When he thinks that he's going to die and no one can tell him what's wrong with him, and he starts to identify his illness, his pain with the knots that is in his neck and on his hips, he starts to stretch. And he thinks back to this time when he was in the Navy, and they brought in a stretching expert in to teach everyone how to stretch, and David Goggins just couldn't relax. He couldn't stretch, and he decided that might be the key. So he started to just try and stretch all the time. He starts with like doing crisscross applesauce, and then he's just bending over, touching his toes and doing shit like this. That was the missing key, is to chill the fuck out, right? In this reading that we just did, he's talking shit about people chilling the fuck out. But in the end, that's what he needs. He needs to relax. He has to calm down. He has to stretch and actually relax his muscles so that he can complete the difficult events and achieve the goals that he wants to achieve. The first posture was simple. I sat on the ground and tried to cross my legs Indian style, but my hips were so tight, my knees were up around my ears. I lost my balance and rolled onto my back. It took all my strength to right myself and try again. I stayed in position for 10 seconds, maybe 15, before straightening my legs because it was too damn painful. Cramps squeezed and pinched every muscle in my lower body. Sweat oozed from my pores, but after a short rest, I folded up my legs and took more pain. I cycled through the same stretch on and off for an hour, and slowly my body started to open. I did a simple quad stretch next, the one we all learned in middle school. Standing on my left leg, I bent my right and grabbed my foot with my right hand. Joe was right. My quads were so bulky and tight, I was like stretching steel cables. Again, I stayed in the posture until my pain was 7 out of 10. Then I took a short break and hit the other side. That standing posture helped to release my quad and stretch out my psoas. The psoas is the only muscle connecting our spine to our lower legs. It wraps around the back of the pelvis, governs the hips, and is known for the fight or flight muscle. As you know, my whole life was fight or flight. As a young kid, drowning in toxic stress, I worked that muscle overtime. Ditto during my 3 hell weeks, Ranger School, and Delta selection, not to mention war. Yet I never did anything to loosen it up, and as an athlete I continued to tap my sympathetic nervous system and had been grinding so hard my psoas continued to stiffen, especially on long runs where my sleep deprivation and cold weather came into play. Now it was trying to choke me from the inside out. I'd learned later that it had tilted my pelvis, compressed my spine, and wrapped my connective tissue tight. It shaved 2 inches off my height. I spoke to Joe about it recently. What was happening to you is an extreme case of what happened to 90% of the population, he said. Your muscles were so locked up that your blood wasn't circulating very well. They were like a frozen steak. You can't inject blood into a frozen steak, and that's why you were shutting down. So as we can see here by this final reading at the end of the book, the Goggins mentality is finalized and honed in, sharpened like the steel cables of David Goggins' thighs by relaxing, by calming down, by continuing to pursue, knowing when to fight, and knowing when to recede. And now we'll move on to our preview portion for this month. And the July book is 1776 by David motherfucking McCullough. So let's start here. Why are we reading 1776? Because it's fucking July, 4th of July. Duh. That's why we're doing 1776. Of course, it makes sense. Also, David McCullough is a G. He's absolute G. I have loved David McCullough since I was in high school. He's my favorite historian to this day. I have personally read multiple books by David McCullough. This is the first one that we have, the only one I believe that we have in the stack for the book club this year. But next year and in the future, there will be more McCulloughs to come. Don't worry about that. There was a whole series of movies that we watched. I think I've talked about this on the show before. It's a whole series of movies that we used to watch in high school in Mr. Lance history class, and the first 5 or 10 minutes was always David McCullough. He was always telling a story about what the movie was going to be about. And I was a horrible student, and the history was the only class that I liked, and I would fucking scream at people to make them be quiet so I could hear the first 10 minutes of this movie so I could listen to David McCullough. I would tell them, I don't care what you do for the rest of the class, but let me hear David McCullough. That is all that I care about. Even then, I was obsessed with McCullough. So, David McCullough, 1776, this book copyrighted in 2005. I read this book when I had COVID, actually. So around this time last year, September of last year, I read this book 10 days. The page and pace for this book, it's 294 pages, which is 9.4 pages a day. That's 2 pages, less than 2 pages, or 2 pages less than the David Goggins book pace. That's excellent. Less than 10 pages a day. That's Cake Town, ladies and gentlemen. And this book is excellently written. There's also several groups of like photos in here. So, you know, we're talking about 294 pages. Are we really talking about 294 pages? Actually, I don't know. Let's see if these are included. So on one side, 117. Nope, they're not included. It's 294 real pages of book. We're out here. 294 real pages of book plus photos, everyone. That is a bonus. Okay. So the other reason that we're reading this book is that I loved it, obviously, or else I wouldn't have put it in the stack. And it inspired me to start returning to source material. This is the book that inspired me to read that enormous John Adams book that was also by David McCullough. 635 pages or something like that. Excellent book, very difficult, but it's what also pushed me to, so we have a copy of the Constitution here and like a bunch of other readings in here. This is my bathroom book that we've talked about, to start just reading more source material to find out the core of the thinking instead of framing my thinking around people's discussions of the core material, of the base material. So something obviously I think more people should do. We were asked recently about some of our core material and stuff like that. It really kind of sent colonized head spinning. So I would implore everyone to take a look at your views and then research where they come from and then research that core material. So with that, I have one more reading that I want to do out of this Goggins book, and then we will end this. After surpassing the 50-mile mark, I could no longer keep up with Miss Ingaki, who bounded ahead like a damn rabbit. I soldiered in on a fatigued state. Pain washed through me in waves. My thighs felt like they were loaded with lead. The heavier they got, the more twisted my stride became. I torqued my hips to keep my legs moving and fought gravity to lift my feet a mere millimeter from the earth. Ah, yes, my feet. My bones were becoming more brittle by the second. My toes had banged the tips of my shoes for nearly 10 hours. Still, I fucking ran. Not fast, not with much style, but I kept going. My shins were the next domino to fall. Each subtle rotation of my ankle joint felt like shock therapy, like venom flowing through the marrow of my tibia. It brought back memories of my duct tape days from class 235, but I didn't bring any tape with me this time. Besides, if I stopped for even a few seconds, starting up again would be near impossible. A few miles later, my lungs seized. My chest rattled as I hawked up knots of brown mucus. It got cold. I became short of breath. Fog gathered around the halogen streetlights, ringing the lamps with electric rainbows, which lent the whole event an otherworldly fear. Or maybe it was just me in the other world. one in which pain was the mother tongue, a language synced to memory. Thank you everyone for joining us. This has been the review preview for June and July. I really hope that you enjoyed this. If you like this, check out all of our other content. Obviously, you can find us on our Instagram, Facebook, Patreon, YouTube, all at Salt of the Streets. We also have our personal social media. I am at Salt of the Street on Twitter and at alpaca_Donavan on Instagram. Calling it a Big Bird Offie on both those things. You can find all of this on our website at saltofthestreets.com. Thank you guys very much. Have a great month. We'll see you then.
Welcome to the salt of the streets, coming at you every week with this food for thought. Hope you ready to eat.